Hi class, my name is Kanani Mirafuentes, and the topic and 10 facts that I will be focusing on today is about the authority of power um, and more into depth the Milgram experiment. So the Milgram experiment was an experiment that was conducted in the 1960s by Stanley Milgram. He was a psychologist from Yale University. This experiment was initially influenced by Milgram's curiosity of why Germans were so willing to commit such awful acts toward the Jewish people during World War II. His main focus for this experiment was to measure the willingness of the participants that he chose, their willingness to obey an authority figure's instructions that more often conflicted with their morality and personal conscience. Through this experiment, it was found that people are willing to obey authority figures over their own personal judgment. It was said that Stanley Milgram was interested in how easily ordinary people could be influenced into committing such atrocities, for example, the Germans in World War II, like I said prior. Milgram drew inspiration for the design of his experiment from the Nazis, who are prime examples of the Milgram effect. This psychological study, was devised to answer the question of whether the millions of Germans that were participating in the Holocaust actually consciously shared the intent of its genocidal goals. So he wanted to figure out if these Germans were actually pursuing this goal, wanting to do this goal, or were they just being told to do it by the authority, by the bigger power, and that they just did it because that's what they were told to do. So that's what this experiment is mainly about. So Milgram tried out the experiment. He tested whether participants would obey the commands to give increasingly painful shocks to other participants. These participants weren't actually shocked. They were pretending they were actors. It's shown in the support video that I also put up. In this experiment, there was a teacher and a learner. The learner was the participant that knew everything about the experiment, and they were the actor. Whereas the teacher was the volunteer that had no idea what was going on and who was being told what to do by the experimenter. The object of this experiment was to see how far the volunteer would go to obey the rules. Milgram had the teacher testing the learner. If they were to get any questions asked wrong, then the teacher had to send shocks. Each shock were increased in voltage. The shocks weren't real, but the teachers were told otherwise. So every time a teacher sent a shock, they were assuming that the learners were actually being shocked. This allowed Milgram to observe whether or not the teacher of the experiment would continue to obey these rules, knowing that someone is getting seriously hurt. To a certain extent, many of the participants asked to stop and even refund the money that they were offering for the experiment. However, there were a few that used the power of authority to continue to shock the learners for their wrong answers. These people were thinking that they were just obeying the rules of the experiment. The original experiment found that 65% of the participants that gave in to the authority of the experimenter continued with the 450-volt shock. So 65% of those people were giving in to what was being told for them to do, and they just shocked them knowing that these people were getting hurt. By the end of the experiment, Milgram was able to split all of the volunteers into 3 categories: those who obeyed but justified themselves, those who obeyed but blamed themselves, and those who rebelled. So those who obeyed but justified themselves, those were obedient participants that gave up responsibility for their actions. They were blaming the experimenter for what they were doing. If anything had happened to the learner, they reasoned for it. They said that it was the experimenter's fault, that the learner was getting hurt and shocked. Others had said that it was the learner's fault that they were getting shocked. They were saying that they were stupid and stubborn and that they deserved to be shocked. Those who obeyed but blamed themselves felt badly about what they had done. They were quite harsh on themselves, actually. Members of the group would perhaps more likely to be to challenge authority if confronted with this kind of situation in the future. They definitely would rethink what they were doing. And lastly, those who rebelled. These rebellious subjects questioned the authority of the experimenter and argued that that there's a different way of going about this, that the learners need to be protected over the needs for the experimenter. Some of these individuals felt that they were accountable to a higher authority, and that what they were doing wasn't the right thing to do. An online source says that Stanley Milgram came up with two theories explaining his results. So the first theory was the theory of conformism, based on the Solomon-Asch conformity experiments, describing the fundamental relationship between the group of reference and the individual person. It states that a subject who has neither ability nor expertise to make decisions, especially in a crisis, will leave decision-making to the group and its hierarchy. So as seen in the video the support video, it shows that the teacher sitting there was under a lot of pressure, kept shocking the guy. The guy was screaming, asking to stop, and he turned around to the experimenter, and the experimenter told him to continue. Because of that, he left his decision to them because it was in a time of crisis, and he just kept shocking him. The second is the agentic state theory, where, according to Milgram, the essence of obedience consists in the fact that a person comes to view themselves as the instrument for carrying out another person's wishes, and they therefore no longer see themselves as responsible for their own actions. Meaning, these people that are giving the shocks think that because the experimenter is telling them what to do, that it's the experimenter's fault, so they shouldn't be reliable. They shouldn't be the reason why these learners are getting shocked. Ultimately, the question of this experiment was, why is it that so many people obey when they feel pressured or forced to do things? And so Milgram did research to find the effect of authority on obedience. He concluded that people will obey due to fear or out of desire to appear cooperative and reliable, even if they are acting against their own moral or better judgment. So that's the moral of the Milgram experiment, and I hope you guys enjoyed.